They told him Americans would torture him, starve him, work him to death in the desert heat. Captain Friedrich Weber had heard the stories whispered through the ranks pass from soldier to soldier like a virus of fear. The propaganda posters showed American soldiers with devil horns and blood-stained hands. His commanding officer had been cleared during their final briefing in Tunisia, better to die fighting than to surrender to the mongrels across the sea. But when the prison truck doors swung open in the blinding Texas sun, what Franz saw made him question everything the Third Reich had ever taught him. An American guard stood at the back of the truck, silhouetted against the fierce light. In his hands, impossibly cold, in this furnace of a day were bottles of Coca-Cola. Beads of condensation ran down the dark glass like tears. The guard was smiling. Franz blinked. The sun hammered against his skull. Dust coated his throat. He had not tasted water in 6 hours, had not tasted hope in 6 months. This had to be a trick. This had to be propaganda cameras hidden somewhere to show the world how merciful Americans pretended to be before the real torture began. The guard thrust a bottle toward him. Franz's hands, shaking from exhaustion and confusion, closed around the cold glass. He looked at the other prisoners climbing down from the truck. 30 men, hollow-eyed and broken, each receiving the same impossible gift. A cold drink, in the desert, from the enemy. He raised the bottle to his lips. The first sip exploded across his tongue. Cold, sweet, unlike anything he had tasted in months of North African hell. The carbonation stung his throat in the most beautiful way. He closed his eyes, and for one moment, one crystalline moment, the war disappeared. When he opened them again, the American guard was watching him with something that looked almost like kindness. This was Texas. This was America. This was supposed to be the enemy. Franz Weber, 32 years old, son of a Bavarian farmer, captain in the Wehrmacht, educated engineer who had never wanted to fight this war, stood in the dust of a prison camp and felt the first crack appear in the armor of everything he believed. Over the next 3 years in this Texas camp, Captain Weber would discover something more dangerous than any weapon the Allies possessed. He would discover the truth about American values. That truth would change not just his life, but would ripple forward through decades, touching the Cold War itself, reshaping how one man understood what it meant to be human. This is the story of how America won a war without firing a single shot at one man, by showing him what freedom really means, by offering him bacon instead of brutality, by teaching him that kindness is not weakness, but the highest form of strength. If your father or grandfather served during World War II, or if you remember hearing stories about German prisoners held in America, share your memories in the comments below. These stories matter now more than ever, because they remind us of who we are at our best. They show us the power of treating enemies not as monsters, but as men. Now let me take you back to where it all began, to the desert sands of North Africa, where Franz Weber learned that surrender was not the end, but the beginning. January 1943. Tunisia. The Afrika Korps was dying. Franz had watched it happen in slow motion over the past year. Rommel's grand offensive had stalled in the Egyptian sand. Supply lines stretched too thin across the Mediterranean. British and American forces pressed from all sides. The Desert Fox himself had abandoned them, recalled to Europe, leaving his army to collapse like a sandcastle before the tide. Franz commanded a company of engineers, good men, farm boys from Bavaria and Prussia, university students from Berlin. They had built bridges and cleared mines and repaired tanks under fire for 2 years. Now they sat in a wadi, ammunition gone water, nearly finished, surrounded by American armor. His sergeant, a grizzled veteran named Klaus, spat into the sand. "We should fight our way out, Herr Hauptmann. Die like soldiers." Franz looked at the 14 men left under his command. Boys, really. The youngest was 19. He had joined them 3 weeks ago, fresh from training, still believing the propaganda about German invincibility. Now he sat with his back against a rock, wounded blood seeping through the makeshift bandage on his leg. "No," Franz said. His voice was quiet but absolute. "I will not watch good men die for a lost cause." Klaus stiffened. "That is defeatist talk, sir. That is reality, Sergeant." Franz met his eyes. "Look around. We have no ammunition, no water, no hope of relief. The war is over for us. I choose to keep my men alive." He stood and walked to the edge of their position. In the distance, American tanks sat in a semicircle waiting. They had not fired in 2 hours. They were giving the Germans time to make the intelligent choice. Franz raised his hands above his head. He stepped into the open. The sun was a physical weight on his shoulders. A voice shouted in English from the American lines. Franz did not catch all the words, but he understood the meaning. Come forward, slowly, keep your hands visible. He walked across the sand. Behind him, one by one, his men followed. They left their weapons in the wadi. They left behind everything except the slim hope that the stories might be wrong, that Americans might show mercy. An American soldier met them halfway. He was short and stocky with a Midwestern accent that Franz barely understood. A corporal. He had a rifle, but it was slung across his back, not pointed at German hearts. Any of you need medical attention? The corporal asked, speaking slowly, clearly. Franz blinked. That was the first question. Not demands for intelligence or threats of execution. One man, Franz managed in his careful English. Leg wound, shrapnel. The corporal nodded. He turned and shouted toward the American lines. Within minutes, a medic appeared. A black man, Franz noticed with surprise. In Germany, they had been told that black soldiers were treated as subhuman by Americans. Yet here he was carrying medical supplies, his uniform as crisp as any white soldier's. The medic knelt beside the wounded boy. He worked quickly, professionally, replacing the blood-soaked bandage with clean gauze, administering morphine, speaking softly in English that the boy could not understand, but which conveyed something universal. You are safe now, you will not die today. Franz watched in stunned silence. His leg throbbed where shrapnel had torn through the muscle weeks ago. He had hidden the limp, refused to acknowledge the infection spreading beneath the dirty bandage. Officers did not show weakness. The black medic looked up at him. Their eyes met. The medic's gaze traveled down to Franz's leg, to the way he stood with weight shifted to the slight tremor of pain he could not quite hide. You're hurt too, Captain. It was not a question. Franz wanted to deny it, wanted to maintain the dignity of rank. But the exhaustion and pain and confusion of this entire impossible day crashed over him. He nodded. Sit down, sir. Let me take a look. And Franz, who had commanded men in battle for 2 years, who had maintained discipline through hell, who had been taught that enemies were to be feared and hated, sat in the North African sand and allowed his enemy to care for his wound. The medic's hands were gentle. He cut away the rotting bandage, cleaned the infected flesh with burning alcohol, applied fresh gauze with practiced efficiency. And as he worked, he spoke. Name's Corporal Jackson, sir. Georgia born and raised. Been a medic since I joined it up in 41. He finished wrapping the wound and sat back. War's a terrible thing, but we ain't not animals. We're still men even when we're fighting each other. He offered Franz a canteen of water. Franz drank deeply. The water was warm and tasted of metal, but it was the sweetest thing he had ever consumed. Then Jackson pulled something from his pack, a brown wrapper. He broke it in half and handed a piece to Franz. Chocolate. American chocolate. A Hershey bar. Franz stared at it. He had not tasted chocolate since 1941. Before the war consumed everything. Before all luxuries became memories. The chocolate melted on his tongue. Sweet and creamy and impossible. He closed his eyes against the tears that threatened to form. How could barbarians make something so perfect? They were loaded onto trucks. 30 prisoners guarded by a dozen Americans. Franz watched for signs of the brutality they had been promised. Instead, he saw American soldiers sharing cigarettes with each other, joking, looking bored with guard duty. At a rest stop, they were given more water and something that shocked Franz to his core sandwiches. White bread and cheese and some kind of meat paste. Not gourmet, certainly, but food. Real food. More than German soldiers had received in weeks. The journey took 3 weeks. First to a processing camp in Algeria, then by ship across the Atlantic. Franz expected the voyage to be hellish, cramped in cargo holds, starving, treated like cargo. Instead, they were housed in converted troop quarters, bunks with actual mattresses. 2 meals a day that, while not elaborate, were consistent and filling. Guards who maintained discipline but showed no cruelty. At night, Franz lay in his bunk and listened to the other prisoners whisper their confusion. This was not what they had been told to expect. Where were the torture chambers? The starvation, the brutality that propaganda had promised would greet any German who fell into American hands. Klaus in the bunk beside him muttered darkly about tricks and propaganda. They fatten us up for the cameras, he insisted. Wait until we reach America. Then we will see their true face. But Franz was beginning to suspect something more unsettling. He was beginning to suspect that they had been lied to, that everything the Reich had taught them about American weakness and cruelty was not just wrong, but backwards. That the real danger was not how Americans would treat them, but what that treatment would reveal about the cause they had been fighting for. The ship docked in Virginia. From there, another train journey through American countryside that looked impossibly green and untouched by war. Fields full of crops, towns with lights burning freely, no blackout curtains, no fear of bombers overhead. Children playing beside the tracks, waving at the train as it passed. Franz pressed his face to the window and stared. This was the enemy homeland. This land of plenty that had not known a single bomb dropped on its soil. The other prisoners crowded around him equally stunned. In Germany, everything was rationed. Coal, food, cloth, hope. Here in the land they were supposed to hate, abundance spilled from every window. They waste electricity, Klaus muttered. Decadent, weak. But his voice held less conviction than before. The train carried them south and west, through forests and plains, past cities that gleamed in the sun, into Texas where the land opened up into something vast and empty and beautiful in a way that made Franz's chest ache with longing for the Bavaria he would probably never see again. They arrived at Camp Swift in the afternoon of a brutally hot April day. The truck that carried them from the train station kicked up clouds of dust that coated everything. Franz stepped down onto Texas soil and squinted against the sun that hung overhead like a judgment. The camp sprawled before them, rows of wooden barracks neatly organized. Guard towers at the corners, but not the menacing fortresses he had expected. Gardens he noticed with shock. Actual vegetable gardens between some of the buildings with prisoners tending tomatoes and beans under the casual watch of guards who seemed more interested in their conversations than in pointing rifles. There was even a baseball diamond. Franz had heard of baseball, but never seen it played. The diamond sat at the edge of the camp, and as they were unloaded, he could see a game in progress. Americans and prisoners, he realized with disbelief, playing together. They were processed through an administrative building. Paperwork, questions about rank and unit in hometown, medical examinations. Each prisoner was given a uniform clean and new-smelling, a towel, a bar of soap, and impossibly a toothbrush. Franz stood in the quartermaster's office and stared at the toothbrush in his hand. It was such a small thing, such an ordinary thing, but he had not seen a toothbrush in over a year. The Wehrmacht did not waste resources on dental hygiene when ammunition was scarce. Why would the Americans give toothbrushes to prisoners? Klaus stood beside him, equally perplexed. It is a trick, Herr Hauptmann, to make us soft before they begin the real torture. But Franz was no longer certain. Everything about this day had been impossible. Everything contradicted what they had been taught. And that toothbrush, that simple, cheap toothbrush, might be the most dangerous weapon of all. Because it suggested that Americans saw them not as enemies to be destroyed, but as human beings who deserve basic dignity. They were assigned to Barrack 7, 30 bunks in a long wooden building that smelled of fresh pine and dust. Each bunk had a thin mattress and a blanket, a luxury compared to the ground they had slept on in Tunisia. Franz claimed a bunk near the door. He sat on the edge and removed his boots. His feet were a mass of blisters and calluses. The new socks they had been given felt impossibly soft. A voice spoke from the doorway, American accented English, slow and clear. Gentlemen, my name is Sergeant David Mitchell. I'm one of the senior guards here at Camp Swift. I want to make a few things clear right from the start. Franz looked up. The sergeant was tall and broad-shouldered, maybe 35 years old, with the weathered face of someone who had spent his life outdoors. His uniform was neat but worn. He wore no sidearm that Franz could see, just a whistle on a lanyard around his neck. Sergeant Mitchell continued his tone conversational matter of fact. This camp operates under the rules of the Geneva Convention. That means you will be treated fairly. You will work because the convention allows for work details, but you will not be abused. You will receive adequate food and shelter. You will be allowed to write letters home within censorship guidelines. If you cooperate, this will be as comfortable as a prison camp can be. If you cause trouble, there are consequences, but they are not brutal ones. We simply restrict privileges. We do not beat prisoners here. We do not torture. We do not starve. That is not how Americans do things. He paused, letting his words sink in. Franz found himself believing every syllable. There was something in Mitchell's voice, a simple honesty, that cut through all propaganda. You will have a roll call every morning at 6. Work details begin at 7. 3 meals a day. Lights out at 9. Sundays are for recreation and rest. Any questions? Silence. 30 men too exhausted and confused to speak. Mitchell nodded. Get some rest. Tomorrow you start learning how to be prisoners of war, American style. He left, the barrack filled with whispers. Some men were suspicious, others cautiously hopeful. Klaus maintained his dark predictions of future cruelty, but Franz said nothing. He lay on his bunk and stared at the wooden ceiling and tried to process everything that had happened since the truck doors opened. America was not supposed to be like this. The enemy was not supposed to offer Coca-Cola, cola and chocolate and toothbrushes. This was not in the script that Nazi propaganda had written. And if that script was wrong about this, what else might it be wrong about? Sleep came fitfully. Franz dreamed of home, of his mother's kitchen in Bavaria, of his sister Anna laughing in the garden. He woke before dawn with his heart pounding, momentarily confused about where he was. Then memory returned. Texas, America, prison, but a prison unlike any he had imagined. The next morning, roll call happened exactly as Sergeant Mitchell had described. The prisoners assembled in the yard while guards checked names against lists. Professional, efficient, no shouting or abuse, just a morning routine. Franz was assigned to kitchen duty. He expected hard labor punishment work, the kind of degrading tasks meant to break a man's spirit. Instead, he found himself in a large kitchen where civilian contractors and prisoners worked side by side, peeling potatoes and washing dishes and preparing meals for hundreds. The head cook was an African-American woman named Mrs. Johnson. She was in her 50s, broad and commanding, with a voice that could carry across the entire kitchen. She took one look at the new prisoners and shook her head. Lord have mercy, y'all are skinny as rails. Don't they feed you in that German army? She did not wait for an answer. Well, you're in Texas now. We'll put some meat on those bones. Franz found himself at a large sink washing pots alongside 2 other prisoners. The work was monotonous but not difficult, and the warmth of the kitchen, the smell of cooking food, the casual banter of the other workers, all of it felt surreal. This was prison labor. This was punishment. Mrs. Johnson moved through the kitchen like a general commanding troops. She corrected technique, praised good work, and maintained a running commentary that no one could fully understand, but which conveyed warmth and humor. Franz caught words here and there, enough to smile at her jokes about Texas heat and stubborn potatoes. Sunday morning arrived. Franz had been in the camp for 4 days. 4 days of routine and adequate food and no brutality. He was beginning to relax, to accept that maybe this was real, that maybe the treatment would not suddenly change. He was in the kitchen, washing dishes from breakfast, when Mrs. Johnson started preparing something that made his stomach clench with sudden hunger. Bacon. The smell hit him first, smoky and salty and rich. His hands stopped moving in the dishwater. He turned and watched as Mrs. Johnson laid thick strips of pork belly onto a massive griddle. The bacon hit the hot surface with a sizzle that filled the entire kitchen. Franz had not smelled meat cooking in over a year. Not real meat, not fresh meat like this. His mouth flooded with saliva. His hands began to shake. The bacon curled as it cooked fat, rendering out edges, crisping to golden brown. The sizzle and pop of hot grease was a symphony, which rose in fragrant clouds. Mrs. Johnson flipped each strip with practiced ease, humming to herself, completely unaware that she was performing a miracle for the starving German prisoner standing 15 feet away. Franz could not look away. Every sense focused on that griddle, on the bacon that represented everything he had lost: home, peace, normalcy, the simple pleasure of good food prepared with care. Mrs. Johnson slid the cooked bacon onto a platter. She turned and caught Franz staring. Her expression softened. She had probably seen that look before on the faces of other prisoners who had forgotten what abundance felt like. You hungry German. Her voice was gentle. Franz nodded. He did not trust his voice. She took 3 strips and put them on a plate, walked over and held it out to him. Here, real Texas bacon. None of that Canadian nonsense. Franz took the plate with trembling hands. He looked down at the bacon. Grease pooled at the edges. Steam rose from the crispy surface. It was so beautiful it hurt. He picked up a strip, bit down. The texture was perfect. Crispy outside, tender inside. The flavor exploded in his mouth. Salty, smoky, rich with rendered fat. The taste of a world that had not forgotten how to live. His eyes closed. A tear escaped and ran down his cheek. He could not stop it. Could not control the wave of emotion that crashed over him. 2 years of war, 2 years of fear and hunger and loss. And now this simple piece of perfectly cooked bacon in the middle of a Texas morning. He opened his eyes to find Mrs. Johnson watching him with something that looked like understanding. "Lord have mercy," she said softly. "You crying over bacon?" Franz's voice broke when he spoke. "In 2 years of war, I have not tasted anything so good. This is what you feed to prisoners." "Baby," Mrs. Johnson said, shaking her head, "you ain't in Germany anymore. This is America. We got plenty." The words hung in the air. We got plenty. Such a simple statement, such a profound truth. America had plenty. While Europe tore itself apart over scraps and ideology and ancient hatreds, America had plenty. Franz finished the bacon, slowly savoring every bite. When the plate was empty, he stood for a moment in the kitchen, surrounded by the sounds and smells of abundance, and felt something fundamental shift inside him. If Americans treated their enemies this well, what did that say about everything the Nazis had taught him? What did that say about which side was truly civilized? That evening, Sergeant David Mitchell walked through the camp on his rounds. He found Franz sitting on the steps outside Barrack 7, writing a letter by the fading light. "Letter home?" Mitchell asked, stopping a few feet away. Franz looked up. "To my mother, in Bavaria, if the censors allow it." Mitchell nodded. "We don't censor personal letters much. Just check for military information." "Your mother must be worried." Franz set down his pencil. He studied the American sergeant, trying to understand this man who represented everything he had been taught to hate. "Why do you do this?" "Do what?" "Treat us like humans." Mitchell pulled out a pack of cigarettes, lit one, offered the pack to Franz. After a moment's hesitation, Franz took one. They smoked in silence for a minute, watching the sun sink toward the horizon. "You're soldiers," Mitchell said finally. "You followed orders same as me. You fought for your country whether you agreed with it or not. War's over for you now. Being cruel won't change anything, won't win the war any faster, won't make you any less dangerous since you already surrendered." He took a long drag. "Kindness ain't weakness, Captain. Takes more strength to show mercy than to show cruelty." Franz considered this. In Germany, mercy was weakness. Compassion was a liability. The strong dominated. The weak perished. That was the natural order according to the ideology he had been immersed in. But sitting here in the Texas evening, smoking an American cigarette given freely by an enemy who spoke of strength through mercy, Franz began to suspect that natural order was not natural at all. It was a lie that weak men told to justify their cruelty. "You have family?" Mitchell asked. "Besides your mother?" "A younger sister, Anna. She is 19, training to be a nurse." "I got a sister too, Mary. She's a school teacher down in San Antonio." "Your sister," Franz said carefully, testing the boundaries of this strange conversation. "She can work. Choose her profession." Mitchell looked at him curiously. "Of course, this is America. Women can do pretty much anything they set their minds to. My sister's got more education than I do. Went to university and everything." Franz absorbed this. In Germany, women's roles were prescribed. Kinder Küche Kirche, children kitchen church. The Reich had no use for educated women pursuing their own dreams. "That must be different," he managed. Mitchell smiled slightly. "I suppose, but it's normal for us. That's what freedom means. People get to choose their own path, long as they're not hurting anyone else." They sat in companionable silence as the stars began to appear. Franz had not felt this kind of peace since before the war. Just two men enemies by circumstance sharing a cigarette in the quiet evening. No threat, no violence, just existence. The days fell into rhythm. Morning roll call, work details, 3 meals that were simple but adequate. Evening recreation time when prisoners could play cards or read or simply rest. Sundays brought a different energy to the camp. Work details were minimal. Prisoners had time to write letters, mend clothes, engage in whatever hobbies they could manage with limited resources. And on Sundays, the Americans played baseball. Franz had heard of the game but never understood it. It seemed chaotic without the rigid structure of the sports he knew. But watching from this edge of the diamond, he began to see the patterns, the strategy, the individual skills combining into team effort. Sergeant Mitchell noticed him watching, walked over with a worn leather glove in his hand. "You know baseball, Captain. I have heard of it, but never seen it played." Mitchell grinned. "Well then, time to learn. Come on." He handed Franz the glove. Led him onto the field. The game paused as the other players, a mix of guards and cooperative prisoners, assessed the newcomer. "He's playing outfield," Mitchell announced. "Go easy on him, first time." Franz found himself standing in the grass beyond the infield glove, awkward on his heart pounding with nervousness. This was absurd. He was a prisoner of war. He should not be playing games with his captors. Klaus would call this collaboration betrayal. But when the bat connected with the ball and it soared high into the Texas sky heading directly toward him, instinct took over. Franz ran, reached up, felt the ball smack into the glove, caught it. Both teams erupted in cheers. An American private ran over Young and, grinning, slapped Franz on the back. "Great catch, Fritz. You're a natural." And for 1 hour, the war disappeared. They were not Germans and Americans, not prisoners and guards, just men playing a game in the afternoon sun, laughing, competing, living. When the game ended, Franz walked back to the barracks in a daze. Klaus intercepted him at the door, face dark with anger. "You should not play with them," Klaus hissed. "It is beneath your dignity. They are the enemy." Franz looked at him, really looked at him, saw the rigid ideology, the refusal to adapt, the clinging to a worldview that had brought nothing but destruction. "They are men," Franz said quietly, "just men, like us. They are Americans. They bomb our cities. They give us bacon," Franz interrupted, "and toothbrushes, and baseball. When did our own army ever care so much for our well-being?" Klaus stepped back as if struck. For a moment, uncertainty flickered across his face, then it hardened again. "You have become soft. You forget who you are." "No," Franz said. "I am remembering who I was, before the war, before the ideology, before we were taught to hate." He pushed past Klaus into the barrack, found his bunk, lay down and stared at the ceiling. Something dangerous was happening to him. He was beginning to understand that everything he had believed was backwards. That strength was not cruelty, but compassion. That freedom was not weakness, but the highest form of civilization. That America, the land he had been taught to despise as decadent and mongrel, possessed something Germany had lost long ago: humanity. And that realization was terrifying. Because if America was right about this, what else had the Reich been wrong about? What had he fought for? What had so many good men died for? Franz closed his eyes and tried not to think about it. But the questions would not leave. They circled in his mind like vultures, waiting, demanding answers he was not yet ready to give. June arrived in Texas with heat that pressed down like a physical weight. The air shimmered above the camp roads. Men moved slower, sought shade, learned to respect the brutal sun that ruled this land. Franz had been at Camp Swift for 3 months. 3 months of routine and adequate food, and the slow erosion of everything he thought he knew about the world. He was beginning to feel almost comfortable. That was dangerous. Comfort meant accepting. Accepting meant the ideology was losing its grip. And if the ideology fell away, what was left? Who was Friedrich Weber, if not a soldier of the Reich? The question kept him awake at night. Then the new transport arrived, and everything changed. Franz was in the kitchen peeling potatoes with the mechanical efficiency of practice when he heard the trucks. New prisoners meant disruption to the routine. New faces, new stories of defeat. But mostly new prisoners meant news from Europe. Updates from the war that seemed increasingly distant from this Texas bubble. He finished his shift and walked toward the processing building, curious despite himself. A crowd of existing prisoners had gathered to watch the newcomers disembark. Franz recognized the hunger in their eyes, the desperate need for connection to home, for proof that Germany still fought, still mattered. The new prisoners filed out, dusty, exhausted, faces hardened by whatever battles had led to their capture. Franz scanned them with casual interest. Then he froze. Walking among the prisoners head high despite the circumstances was a face from another life, a face Franz had hoped never to see again. Major Klaus Richter, SS officer, university rival, true believer. Their eyes met across the yard. Recognition flared in the Klaus's face, followed immediately by contempt. He broke from the processing line and strode toward Franzen with the arrogance of a man who had never truly accepted defeat. Weber. Klaus's voice dripped with disgust. I should have known you would be here. You always were weak. Franz felt the old anger rise. The old rivalry from their student days when Klaus had joined the Nazi party with fervent enthusiasm while Franz had quietly resisted. But the anger was muted now. Tired. He had moved beyond such things. Klaus, I heard you were captured at Sicily. Temporarily detained. Klaus's jaw clenched. The Führer will turn this war around. We will be freed. Germany will prevail. Franz said nothing. What was there to say? That Germany was losing, that the war was already over. Everyone just had not admitted it yet. Klaus would never accept such truth. Klaus's eyes traveled around the camp, took in the baseball diamond, the gardens, the prisoners lounging in the shade looking almost relaxed. His lip curled. What is this place, a resort? Have you forgotten you are soldiers? We are prisoners, Franz said quietly. There is a difference. There should be no difference. A German soldier never stops fighting, never becomes comfortable in enemy hands. Klaus stepped closer, voice dropping to a harsh whisper. Look at you. Look at all of you. Playing their games, eating their food, smiling. You disgust me, Weber. You have forgotten the fatherland. Franz met his gaze steadily. I have forgotten nothing. I have simply learned to see things clearly. You have been corrupted. Klaus spat the words. But I will remind them, all of them. We are Germans. We serve the Reich, and we resist. He turned and stalked away. Franz watched him go and felt a cold weight settle in his chest. Klaus was going to cause trouble. That was inevitable. Men like Klaus could not exist without conflict, without certainty, without an enemy to fight. The question was how much damage he would do before reality broke through his armor of ideology. The answer came quickly. Within 3 days, Klaus had identified the hardcore believers among the prisoner population. About 20 men who still clung to Nazi ideology, who saw cooperation as betrayal, who believed that resistance, even futile resistance, was the only honorable path. They met in secret at night in Barrack 12. Franz heard about the meetings through the prison grapevine. Klaus was organizing, planning, preparing to make Camp Swift into a battleground. On the 4th night, Franz was walking back from the latrine when he saw Klaus and 3 others slip into Barrack 12. Curiosity warred with caution. He should not involve himself, should stay neutral. But something in Klaus's intensity worried him. Men like that did damage, to themselves and everyone around them. Franz moved closer to the barrack, found a spot near a window where voices carried in the still night air. Klaus's voice passionate and certain. We must resist. Show these Americans that German spirit cannot be broken. Refuse work details. Sabotage when possible. Remind our fellow prisoners who they are, where their loyalty belongs. Another voice, younger, uncertain. But Major, the Americans treat us well. Is it not better to what collaborate become their pets? Klaus's anger was palpable even through the wall. You have been seduced by their tricks. The bacon, the games, the soft beds, all designed to make you forget Germany, to make you accept defeat. I tell you, defeat is temporary. The Führer has secret weapons, new strategies. When Germany turns the tide, those who collaborated will be remembered and punished. Silence, then murmurs of agreement, not enthusiastic, but enough. Klaus had found his followers. Franz walked back to his barrack with a sick feeling in his gut. Klaus was going to force everyone to choose sides, and Franz was not sure which side he belonged to anymore. The resistance began small, 5 prisoners refusing work detail. They cited Geneva Convention rules about officer labor. Technically correct, but the spirit of defiance was clear. Sergeant Mitchell handled it with characteristic calm. He simply informed them that work was optional, but so were privileges. No work meant no access to recreation, no library, no extra food rations. They could sit in their barracks and contemplate their principles. Klaus and his followers sat. For 3 days, they remained in Barrack 12, emerging only for roll call and mandatory meals. Their absence created a strange tension in the camp. Some prisoners admired their defiance. Others saw it as pointless stubbornness. Franz tried to stay neutral, but neutrality was becoming impossible. On the fourth day, Klaus expanded his campaign. His followers began small acts of sabotage. Broken tools, spoiled food, nothing major, nothing that would bring serious punishment, just enough to disrupt, to prove they still had power. Franz was in the workshop repairing a truck engine when one of Klaus's men deliberately dropped a wrench into the machinery. Metal shrieked, the engine seized. Hours of work destroyed in seconds. The man looked at Franz with defiant eyes, waiting for approval, expecting solidarity. Franz felt only exhaustion. "Get out," he said quietly. "But Herr Hauptmann," I thought. "Get out." The man fled. Franz stared at the ruined engine and felt something inside him harden. Klaus was not fighting for Germany. He was fighting because fighting was all he knew, because ideology had replaced thought, because admitting he might be wrong would destroy the foundation of his entire identity. Franz understood that impulse. He had felt it himself. But he was learning to let it go, to accept that being wrong about the war did not make him worthless. It made him human. That evening, several prisoners approached Franz. Good men, practical men, Corporal Hans among them. "Hauptmann," Hans said, using the old rank out of respect. "You must stop him. Klaus is causing trouble for everyone. The Americans are patient, but patience has limits. If this continues, they will crack down. Remove privileges for all of us." "I am not in command anymore," Franz said, "but you are respected. Men listen to you. You could stop this before it gets worse." Franz looked at Hans, young, maybe 22. He had survived North Africa and capture and 3 months in this camp. He deserved better than to be caught in Klaus's ideological war. "What would you have me do, lad?" Hans said simply. "You are a captain. Act like one." Franz wanted to refuse, wanted to stay in the comfortable neutrality he had cultivated. But looking at Hans's face at the faces of the other men who had gathered, he realized that neutrality was a lie. In this situation, silence was choosing Klaus's side, allowing the madness to continue. "I will think about it," he said finally. That night, Sergeant Mitchell found Franz sitting alone behind the mess hall, smoking and staring at the stars. "You look troubled, Captain." Franz glanced up. Mitchell stood a few feet away, hands in pockets, expression casual but eyes sharp. The American missed nothing. "There are tensions in the camp. Klaus Richter and his boys." Mitchell pulled out his own cigarettes. Lit one. "Yeah, I noticed. Question is, what are you going to do about it?" "Me, I am a prisoner. I have no authority." Mitchell smiled slightly. "You're a leader, Franz. Authority comes from respect, not rank. Those men in there, most of them look to you. You stood up in Tunisia and chose to save lives instead of dying for a lost cause. That took guts. They remember. And if I stand against Klaus, if I tell them to cooperate with you, they will call me traitor. Some will. Others will call you wise." Mitchell took a long drag. "Here's the thing. Klaus is fighting a war that's already over. He's clinging to ideology because letting go would mean admitting he wasted years of his life on a lie. That's hard. I get it. But you, Franz, you've already started letting go. I can see it. And that scares Klaus more than any American weapon. Because if you can change, maybe he's wrong about everything." Franz closed his eyes. Mitchell saw too much, understood too much. "You cannot win a man's mind with force," he said quietly. "No," Mitchell agreed, "but you can with example. You can show them there's another way. That cooperation ain't weakness. That accepting reality ain't betrayal. They need to hear it from someone they respect. Someone German. Someone who fought the same battles they did." He stubbed out his cigarette. "Think about it, Captain. But don't think too long. Klaus is escalating. Eventually he's going to do something we can't ignore. Better to stop it before that happens." Mitchell walked away. Franz sat in the darkness and felt the weight of impossible choices pressing down. The decision was made for him 2 days later. Klaus called for a general work strike. All prisoners were to refuse work details. Show the Americans that German will could not be broken. About 60% of the camp complied. Not out of ideological fervor, Franz suspected, but out of habit. Following orders, afraid to stand alone. The camp ground to a halt. Gardens untended, kitchen understaffed, maintenance work abandoned. The American commander, a stern colonel named Patterson, called an assembly. All prisoners to the main yard, immediately. Franz stood with the others in the brutal midday sun. Colonel Patterson mounted a platform. His face was hard, disappointed. "Gentlemen," he said, his voice carrying across the silent crowd, "I have tried to run this camp with fairness and respect. I have treated you according to the Geneva Convention, and I believe with more kindness than strictly required. This is what I get in return: organized resistance, sabotage." He paused. Let the words sink in. "Fine. You want to refuse work, that is your right under the convention. But understand the consequences. No work means no privileges, for anyone, not just those refusing. You want to act as a unit, you will be treated as a unit. Recreation canceled, library closed, extra rations eliminated. You will receive the bare minimum required by international law, nothing more." A murmur rippled through the prisoners. This was not what they expected. Collective punishment, the innocent suffering with the guilty. Franz saw the calculation on faces around him, saw men who had not wanted to strike, now realizing they would pay the price anyway. Klaus stood near the front face triumphant. He had wanted this, wanted the Americans to show their true face, wanted to prove that kindness was a lie, but Colonel Patterson was not finished. "There is one way to avoid this," he said. "Someone needs to take responsibility. Explain to your fellow prisoners why cooperation benefits everyone. Make the case for working together. If someone can convince the majority to return to work details, I will consider this incident closed. Privileges will be restored." He stepped down. The assembly remained, waiting, everyone looking at each other. Who would speak? Who would risk Klaus's wrath? Franz felt Hans's eyes on him, felt the weight of expectation, felt the moment crystallize into decision. He stepped forward. The crowd parted. Franz walked to the platform, climbed the steps, turned to face 300 German prisoners. His heart hammered. His mouth was dry. This was not a battlefield. This was worse. This was truth against ideology, reason against faith, and he had no weapon but words. "Brothers," he began, his voice rough, "I call you brothers because we shared the same uniform, the same flag, the same oath, but I ask you, what did that oath get us?" Silence. He had their attention. "I fought in North Africa for 2 years. I watched good men die in the sand for orders that made no sense. I watched us retreat because our supplies never came while our leaders ate well in Berlin. I watched the Africa Corps collapse because the men who sent us to fight did not care enough to keep us supplied, to keep us fed, to give us a chance to win." He saw nods, remembered pain flickering across faces. "When I was captured, I expected death or torture. The propaganda told us Americans were barbarians, monsters. What I got was a bottle of Coca-Cola, a medic who treated my wound, a black corporal from Georgia who offered me chocolate and called me sir." Nervous laughter rippled through the crowd. Even in this moment, the absurdity struck them. "I know it sounds absurd, but that bottle of Coca-Cola and that chocolate bar were the first time in 2 years that anyone treated me like a human being. Not a number, not a weapon, not a tool to be used and discarded. A man, with dignity, with worth." His voice grew stronger. The words came easier now. "Major Richter tells you to resist, to remember Germany. I ask you, which Germany? The one that drafted us to conquer countries we had never heard of, the one that promised victory and delivered defeat, the one that told us we were superiors while we starved in the desert, or the Germany of our mothers and fathers, the Germany of farms and forests, the Germany that existed before madmen took control?" Klaus's face was purple with rage, but he did not interrupt. Could not. Not without proving Franz's point. That Germany is gone. We lost, not because we were cowards, not because we did not fight hard enough. We lost because we followed leaders who cared more about ideology than reality, who sacrificed millions for ideas that make no sense when you actually examine them. The crowd was completely still. Franz could see the wheels turning in their minds. the questions forming. Here in this camp, Americans treat us better than our own officers did. They give us 3 meals a day, medical care, clean clothes, toothbrushes. He smiled slightly. Toothbrushes, brothers. When did the Wehrmacht care about our teeth? They give us recreation, books, baseball. They teach us their games because they see us not as enemies, but as men. Major Richter sees weakness in this. I see civilization. I see a nation strong enough to show mercy, confident enough to treat enemies with dignity. That is not weakness. That is the highest form of strength. His voice rose. The war is over for us. We have a choice. Hold on to a lie that cost millions of lives, or accept that maybe, just maybe, we were on the wrong side. That freedom is not weakness. That kindness is not stupidity. That America, for all its flaws, understands something fundamental that the Reich forgot. That human dignity matters. That every man, regardless of where he was born, has worth. He paused. Let the silence stretch. I choose freedom. I choose cooperation. I choose to see my captors as men doing their duty the same as we did ours. Who is with me? For 3 heartbeats, nothing happened. Franz stood alone on the platform, suddenly terrified that he had miscalculated. That ideology would win. That his words would fall on deaf ears. Then Corporal Hand stepped forward, began to clap, slow, steady, deliberate. Another prisoner joined him. Then another. The applause built like a wave. Within seconds, 2/3 of the prisoners were clapping, some with tears in their eyes, some with relief, some with the quiet acceptance of men who had been waiting for permission to let go of a burden too heavy to carry. Klaus stood rigid. His few followers looked uncertain, trapped between loyalty to ideology and the reality that most of their comrades had chosen another path. Franz stepped down from the platform. His legs shook. He had just committed treason, or saved lives, or both. History would decide which. Sergeant Mitchell waited at the bottom of the steps. Hell of a speech, Captain. Franz could not speak, could only nod. That night, walking back to his barrack, Franz heard footsteps behind him. Fast. Multiple people. He turned just as the first blow landed. Klaus and 3 followers. Fists and boots. Franz tried to defend himself, but 4 against 1 was impossible. He went down. Ribs cracked. Something split his lip. Blood filled his mouth. Traitor, Klaus hissed, kicking him again. When Germany wins, you will hang. You and all the other collaborators. Another kick. Franz curled into a ball, protected his head, waited for it to end. It ended when voices shouted. Flashlights, guards running. Klaus and his men scattered into the darkness. Franz lay in the dust, pain radiating through his entire body, and thought with strange clarity that at least now the lines were drawn. At least now everyone knew where they stood. He woke in the medical tent. Sunlight filtered through canvas. Everything hurt. Breathing was agony. He tried to sit up and gasped at the pain in his ribs. Easy there, Captain. A woman's voice, accented but clear. You have 3 cracked ribs and a mild concussion. You need to rest. Franz turned his head carefully. A young Japanese woman in nurse's uniform stood beside his cot. She was arranging bandages with efficient movements. Her face was calm, professional, but her eyes held something deeper. Understanding, perhaps, or shared pain. You are Japanese, he said, the observation escaping before he could censor it. She glanced at him. American. My parents were born in Japan. I am Yuki Tanaka. I work here as a nurse. They allow a Japanese woman to work in a German prison camp. Yuki's expression hardened slightly. This is America. They need nurses. I am a nurse. My parents are in an internment camp in California because the government does not trust Japanese Americans. But they still need my skills. So here I am treating German prisoners who probably think I am the enemy. Franz heard the bitterness, the irony. I am sorry about your parents. She looked at him more closely. That is unexpected. Most do not care. I have learned that enemies are often just people caught in circumstances beyond their control. Yuki's expression softened. She returned to checking his bandages. Your speech yesterday. I heard about it. That took courage. Or stupidity. Klaus did not appreciate it. Klaus Richter will spend 30 days in isolation, as will his 3 accomplices. What they did was assault. The camp takes that seriously. Franz closed his eyes. 30 days of isolation would only make Klaus more bitter, more certain of his righteousness. But that was Klaus's choice, his burden. You should rest, Yuki said. I will check on you later. She left. Franz lay in the quiet tent and took inventory of his pain. Physical was manageable, would heal. But the other pain, the knowledge that he had fully broken with his past, with the ideology that had shaped his early adult years, that would take longer to process. The tent flap opened again. Sergeant Mitchell entered, hat in hand. He pulled up a stool and sat beside the cot. How you feeling? Like I was beaten by 4 men. Mitchell smiled slightly. Fair assessment. For what it is worth, your speech worked. Work details resumed this morning. Almost full participation. You did good, Franz. Franz said nothing. Good felt relative. I brought you something, Mitchell continued. He produced a small bundle wrapped in cloth, unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a slice of pie. Apple pie from the smell. Still warm. Mrs. Johnson made it fresh this morning. Said you need sweetness to heal. Franz stared at the pie. The simple kindness of it threatened to undo him completely. He was a prisoner who had just been beaten by his own countrymen for choosing the side of his captors. And here was an enemy bringing him pie. Mitchell handed him a fork. Franz took a small bite. The pie was perfect, warm apples with cinnamon, flaky crust that crumbled on his tongue, sweet and tart, and everything good about a world that still knew how to create beauty despite the war. This is heaven, Franz whispered. Mitchell chuckled. That is just Texas, Captain. Heaven probably has better pie. They sat in comfortable silence while Franz finished the pie. When the plate was empty, Mitchell took it and stood to leave. One more thing, he said at the door. Klaus called you a traitor, but I want you to know something. Choosing peace over violence is not betrayal. Choosing truth over lies is not weakness. You did the right thing, and I am proud to know you. He left before Franz could respond. Franz lay back and stared at the tent ceiling. His ribs ached. His head throbbed. But for the first time since Tunisia, he felt something that might be peace. He had chosen. And choice, even painful choice, was its own kind of freedom. 3 days later, Franz returned to regular duties. Klaus and his followers remained in isolation. The camp settled into new rhythms. Work details functioned smoothly. Prisoners and guards developed working relationships based on mutual respect. Baseball games resumed on Sundays. Franz found himself spending more time with David Mitchell. Not formally, just moments stolen between duties. Conversations about nothing important. Family, home. The small details of life before war consumed everything. David told stories about the Mitchell Ranch, about breaking horses and mending fences, and the particular beauty of a Texas sunrise. Franz found himself hungry for these stories. They represented something he thought he had lost forever. The possibility of a normal life, of work that built instead of destroyed, of purpose that did not require killing. One evening they sat on the porch of the guards' quarters. David had invited Franz to join him and several other guards for coffee. Real coffee. The smell alone was intoxicating. Franz cradled the cup in his hands and inhaled. This is real coffee, not chicory substitute. Corporal Hayes, a young guard from Pennsylvania, grinned. We are drowning in coffee. Brazil sends tons of it. You want more, just ask. In Germany, coffee has been ersatz since 1940. Ground acorns mostly. Hayes's grin faded. Acorns, Jesus. No wonder you invaded Poland. Everyone laughed, including Franz. The joke was terrible, dark, but somehow perfect. The first time he had laughed about the war, about the absurdity of it all. The radio played softly in the background. Glenn Miller, American swing music that was officially forbidden in Germany, but which every soldier had secretly loved. David hummed along, tapping his foot. You like swing? He asked Franz. I did, before it was banned. We used to listen to American jazz in university, late at night, very quietly. It was forbidden, but everyone did it anyway. David raised an eyebrow. So you've been breaking Nazi rules for a while? I suppose I have. The music shifted. A news broadcast. Allied advances in Italy, bombings of German cities. Hamburg had been hit particularly hard. The announcer's voice was matter-of-fact, describing destruction like weather reports. Franz went quiet. David noticed immediately. "You okay? My mother lives near Munich. If they bomb there..." Franz could not finish the thought. David's expression turned serious. "I am sorry, war is hell on everyone, soldiers and civilians both." "Then why?" Franz's voice broke slightly. "Why do it? Why start it? Did your people start it, or did your leaders?" Franz stared into his coffee. The question cut to the bone. "I do not know anymore. I thought I was fighting for Germany, for honor, for survival. But now I think I was just following orders that made no sense, following men who cared more about power than people." David leaned back. "My daddy fought in the First War, came back saying that wars are started by old men who send young men to die for ideas that do not feed anybody. I think he was right. The question is not what you fought for then, it is what you believe now." Franz looked at him. "I believe that the bacon Mrs. Johnson makes is better than anything I ever fought for." David laughed, a real laugh, genuine and warm. That is probably the most honest thing anyone has said in this camp. But underneath the laughter, both men understood the truth of it. Franz had found something in Texas that Germany had never offered. Not ideology or glory or conquest, just simple human dignity. Bacon and coffee and the freedom to sit on a porch with men who should be enemies, but who had become something else. Something like friends. May 8th, 1945. The news came over the radio. Germany had surrendered. Unconditionally. The war in Europe was over. Colonel Patterson assembled all prisoners in the main yard. His face was grave but not unkind. He stood on the platform and let the silence settle before speaking. "Gentlemen, I have news. Germany has surrendered to Allied forces. The war in Europe is over. I know this is difficult to hear. I know some of you still hope for victory, but it is done. Your country has laid down arms. The killing has stopped." The reaction was mixed. Some prisoners wept. Some stood in stunned silence. A few looked relieved. Klaus, just released from isolation that morning, stood rigid. His face was a mask, but Franz could see the cracks, the ideology crumbling under the weight of reality. Franz felt numb. He had known this was coming, had accepted it months ago, but hearing it made it real. Germany was defeated, occupied. Everything he had known was ash. That evening, Franz sat alone on his bunk, did not go to dinner, could not face food or conversation or the complex emotions swirling through the camp. Hans and several others tried to talk to him. He sent them away gently. Around 10, Sergeant Mitchell appeared at the barrack door. "Franz, walk with me." They walked in silence to the edge of the camp, stood at the fence looking out at the dark Texas landscape. Stars blazed overhead, the same stars that shone over Germany, over the rubble of cities, over the graves of millions. "You okay?" David asked finally. Franz did not answer immediately. How could he explain the hollow feeling? The sense that everything he had built his identity on had evaporated. "My country is ashes. I have no home." "You have time. That is something." "Time for what?" "To decide who you want to be. War is over. You get to start fresh. Build something new. That is more than a lot of men get." Franz turned to look at him. "You think it is that simple that I can just forget everything and start over?" "Not forget, learn from. There is a difference." David pulled out his cigarettes, offered one to Franz. They smoked in the warm night air. "You made a choice 3 weeks ago, stood up and chose truth over lies. That took guts. Now you get to keep choosing, every day, what kind of man you want to be, what kind of life you want to build when this is all over." "I do not even know if my mother is alive." "Then you hope, and you wait, and when the mail system works again, you find out. And you deal with whatever reality brings. But giving up now after everything you have survived, that would be a waste." Franz took a long drag, let the smoke fill his lungs, released it slowly. "How do you do it?" he asked quietly. "How do you stay so certain, so steady?" David considered this. "I am not always certain, but I know this being kind is never wrong. Treating people with dignity is never a mistake. Everything else is just details." They stood together, prisoner and guard, Germans and American. Two men on opposite sides of history, united by the simple recognition of shared humanity. And Franz realized something. He had lost everything. His country, his cause, his certainty. But he had gained something too. The possibility of becoming someone better than who he had been. The chance to build a life on truth instead of lies. It was not much, but it was enough to keep breathing. Enough to face tomorrow. Enough to hope. Summer turned to fall. Fall became winter. The seasons rolled through Texas with their own rhythms indifferent to the chaos of human conflict. Franz watched the mesquite trees lose their leaves and sprout new growth. He watched the cattle in distant fields grow heavy with calves. He watched America continue its life as if the war were a distant memory rather than a present reality. The repatriation process began in early 1946. Ships were being organized. Prisoners would return home in waves. Priority given to the sick and wounded. Then officers, then enlisted men. The camp buzzed with nervous energy. Men who had spent years dreaming of home now faced the reality of return. Return to what rubble occupation starvation. Franz received his notification in March. He was scheduled for transport in June. 3 months to prepare for a homecoming he no longer wanted. The letter from his mother arrived in April. Red Cross delivery, months old but still precious. Franz held it with shaking hands, afraid to open it, afraid of what news it might contain. He sat on his bunk, took a breath, broke the seal. The handwriting was his mother's, shaky but readable. Alive then. She was alive. My dearest Friedrich, she wrote, I received your letters through the Red Cross. Such joy to know you live, that you are safe. I wept for hours. Your sister Anna and I have survived, though barely. Our home was destroyed in the bombings. We live now with the Schneiders, our old neighbors. They have a cellar that became our shelter. Food is scarce. Coal for heating, nearly impossible to find. The occupation is difficult. Soviet soldiers at first, now American in our sector. But we survive. We endure. Come home, my son. Come home so I can see your face again before I die. Franz read the letter 3 times. Each word was a knife. His mother alive but suffering. His sister alive but in what condition? His home destroyed. Bavaria under occupation. He should feel joy, relief. They survived. But all he felt was a hollow ache, because he knew with terrible certainty that he did not want to go back. Not to rubble, not to occupation, not to a Germany that would take decades to rebuild. Not to a land where his military service would be viewed with shame, where admitting he had changed his mind about the war would make him a pariah. But how could he abandon his family? The question tormented him for days. He could not eat, could not sleep, moved through work details like a ghost. David noticed. Of course he noticed. David saw everything. They were in the workshop. Franz was pretending to focus on repairing a pump. His hands moved, but his mind was elsewhere. David set down his clipboard and walked over. You have been quiet lately. Franz did not look up. I received a letter from my mother. Good news. She is alive. That is good. Everything else is complicated. David waited, giving space for Franz to continue or not. That was his way, never pushing. Just present. Franz set down his tools, looked at David. What if I do not want to go back? The question hung between them. Dangerous, treasonous perhaps, certainly selfish. David's expression did not change. What if you stayed here in America? Government is starting a program. German POWs can apply for permanent residence if they have sponsors. Work skills, good behavior records, you qualify. Franz stared at him. The possibility had never occurred to him. Day in America, the enemy country, the man he had fought against, except it was not the enemy anymore. Had not been the enemy for a long time. Not really. You would sponsor me. Franz's voice was barely a whisper. My family's ranch needs help. You know farming, engineering. You work harder than any 3 men I have met. Plus, David paused. Something shifted in his expression. Plus, you are my friend. I do not want to see you go back to nothing. Friend. The word landed with weight. When had that happened? When had prisoner and guard become friends? Franz thought about Bavaria. rubble and occupation and food shortages. Thought about his mother and sister struggling. Thought about spending years rebuilding a country that had betrayed everything it claimed to stand for. Then he thought about Texas, bacon and baseball and coffee on the porch. Thought about David's steady presence. Thought about Mrs. Johnson's kindness. Thought about a land where a man could start over, where past mistakes did not define future possibilities. "I cannot abandon my family," he said finally. "You would not be abandoning them. You would be building something you could use to help them. Get established here. Send money. Bring them over eventually if they want to come. But Franz going back to Germany right now, that is not going to help anyone. You will be just another mouth to feed in a country that can barely feed its own." The logic was sound, cruel but sound. Franz knew David was right, knew that returning to Bavaria would accomplish nothing except making him as miserable as everyone else. But the guilt, the terrible guilt of choosing his own future over duty to family. "Think about it," David said. "You have time, but not much." Franz thought about nothing else for 2 weeks, wrestled with duty and desire, with obligation and opportunity, with the man he had been raised to be and the man he was becoming. Finally, he wrote 2 letters, the first to his mother, the hardest thing he had ever written. Each word felt like betrayal, but he forced himself to be honest. "Mother, I must tell you something that will hurt. I am staying in America, not because I do not love you and Anna, but because in Germany I have nothing to build with. Here I have a chance. I will send money. I will bring you here when I can. But I must start a new life. The Germany I knew is gone. The Germany that exists now has no place for me. Please forgive me. Please understand, I choose life over duty, and I hope that makes me wise rather than selfish." The second letter was to the U.S. Army Administration, application for permanent residence under the sponsor program. David Mitchell as sponsor. Friedrich Weber requesting permission to remain in America. He mailed both letters and felt simultaneously liberated and damned. The response from his mother took 2 months. Franz lived in agony waiting, certain she would disown him, curse him, reject him for his selfishness. When the letter came, he could barely bring himself to open it. "Friedrich, my son," she wrote, "I will not lie and say I am not disappointed. O Uspen. I had hoped to see you again, to hold you, to know you were home. But I am also not blind. I know what Germany has become. I know the suffering here. I know that you would find nothing but pain if you returned. So I give you my blessing. Build your life. Be happy. Send pictures of this Texas you write about. And know that a mother's love crosses oceans. You are still my son. You will always be my son. Make something good from all this tragedy. That is all I ask." Franz wept when he read it. Great heaving sobs that shook his entire body. Relief and grief and gratitude all tangled together. His mother understood. She released him, gave him permission to choose himself. And with that permission, Franz Weber began the process of becoming an American. The legal work took months. Paperwork, interviews, background checks. The U.S. government was cautious about allowing former enemy soldiers to remain. But David's sponsorship carried weight. The Mitchell family had deep Texas roots, multiple generations of service and community standing. When David Mitchell vouched for someone, it meant something. In September 1946, Franz received approval. Permanent resident status granted, conditional on employment and good behavior. He was free to leave the camp, free to begin. The day he walked out of Camp Swift as a free man felt surreal. David met him at the gate with a truck. Franz carried everything he owned in a single bag: the clothes on his back, the English primer he had studied, a few letters from home. That was all. They drove to the Mitchell Ranch, 40 miles of Texas landscape, vast and empty and beautiful in a way that made Franz's chest ache. Germany was lush and green and ancient. Texas was raw and open and young. Both had their own kind of beauty. The Mitchell Ranch sprawled across 5,000 acres. Cattle and horses, fields of cotton and hay, a main house that looked like it had stood for generations, outbuildings for workers, a bunkhouse where ranch hands lived. David's father, Thomas Mitchell, was 68, weathered and lean and skeptical. He looked Franz up and down with the assessing gaze of a man who judged people by their work rather than their words. German, huh? His voice was gravel and dust. Yes, sir. Can you ride horses? No, sir. But I can learn. Thomas grunted. Better learn fast. Cattle do not wait for city boys to figure things out. David grinned. He is not a city boy, Dad. He is a farmer's son from Bavaria. Just never worked cattle before. Bavaria. Thomas spat tobacco juice into the dirt. That is mountains, right, rocky soil. Stubborn land. Yes, sir, Franz said carefully. Very stubborn. Good. Stubborn land makes strong men. You will do. He turned and walked toward the barn. Conversation over. Judgment passed. Franz had been accepted. The bunkhouse was simple. Cots for 6 men. Franz would be sharing space with 4 other ranch hands. All Texans, all curious about the German who was joining their crew. They were polite but reserved. Franz understood. He was an outsider, an enemy. He would have to prove himself through work. The work was brutal. Franz had thought military service was hard. The ranch made military service look easy, up before dawn. 16-hour days, mending fences, herding cattle, breaking horses, hauling feed, repairing equipment. His hands blistered, his back screamed, his muscles learned new definitions of exhaustion. But he did not complain, did not ask for mercy, just worked, day after day, proving that a German could pull his weight on a Texas ranch. By October, the other ranch hands had stopped watching him with suspicion, started including him in their conversations, taught him their trade with rough affection. By November, they were joking with him. By December, they invited him to join their weekly poker games. Franz was becoming one of them. The money was not much, $20 a week plus room and board. But Franz saved every penny, sent half to his mother through the Red Cross, kept the other half for the future he was slowly building. He also continued seeing Yuki. She had left Camp Swift when it closed, moved to Austin, found work at a civilian hospital. They met for coffee sometimes. Awkward at first, a German former soldier and a Japanese-American former internee, both trying to figure out how to exist in a country that had fought their homelands. Their shared displacement became a bond. They understood each other's complications, the guilt of thriving while their families suffered, the confusion of loving a country that had imprisoned them, the slow process of building identity from broken pieces. By early 1947, their coffee meetings had become something more. A tentative courtship, strange and fragile and real. Thomas Mitchell noticed, mentioned it to David. David mentioned it to Franz while they were fixing a fence. Yuki Tanaka, the Japanese nurse. Franz kept his eyes on the barbed wire he was stretching. Yes. You sweet on her. We are friends. David grinned. Boy, I have seen how you look at her. That is not friendship. That is something more. Franz felt heat rise in his face. Is that a problem? Problem? Why would it be a problem? She is a nice girl, smart, kind. You could do a lot worse. David hammered a staple into the fence post. Besides, you two have a lot in common. Both strangers in a strange land. Both trying to figure out where you fit. Makes sense you would find each other. Your father will not mind. My father minds his own business when it comes to matters of the heart. Long as you keep working hard and treating her right, he will not say a word. Franz felt something loosen in his chest, permission he had not realized he was seeking. The freedom to want, to hope, to build something beyond mere survival. November 1947, Thanksgiving. David invited Franz to the main house for dinner. Family tradition. All the ranch hands were included. A feast to celebrate harvest, in survival, in gratitude. Franz had never experienced Thanksgiving, did not fully understand the tradition. But when he walked into the Mitchell dining room and saw the table, he understood plenty. Food, everywhere. More food than seemed possible. A turkey so large it barely fit the platter. Mountains of mashed potatoes, gravy in a tureen, stuffing that smelled of sage and butter. Green beans, cranberry sauce. Rolls so fresh they steamed when broken open. And pies. 3 different pies cooling on the sideboard. Apple, pumpkin, pecan. Franz stood in the doorway and could not move, could not process this abundance. In Germany, his family was rationing bread. Here in Texas, there was so much food it might go to waste. David's mother, Margaret Mitchell, noticed his paralysis. She was a small woman with steel in her spine and kindness in her eyes. She walked over and took his arm. "Franz, dear, come sit. You are family now." Family. The word had unlocked something. Franz allowed himself to be led to the table, given a seat between David and one of the ranch hands. A plate placed before him, food heaped upon it until it threatened to overflow. Thomas Mitchell stood at the head of the table, raised his glass of water. "We give thanks for the harvest, for the health of our animals and our people, for the men who work this land with honor, for family blood and chosen, and for second chances that let good men find their way home." His eyes landed on Franz for that last sentence. Acknowledgement. Acceptance. They ate. Franz took his first bite of turkey and nearly wept. Tender, juicy, seasoned perfectly. The mashed potatoes were cream and butter and comfort. The stuffing was somehow both crispy and soft. The cranberry sauce was tart and sweet and unlike anything he had tasted. But it was the pie that undid him. Margaret served him a slice of apple pie, still warm. The crust was golden and flaky. The apples were tender but not mushy. Cinnamon and nutmeg sang through every bite, the slight tartness of the fruit balanced by the sweetness of the filling. Franz closed his eyes, tried to memorize this moment, this flavor, this feeling of being full, not just in stomach, but in soul. "This is heaven," he whispered. Margaret smiled. "This is just Texas, dear, and you are home now." Home. In 1947, sitting at a table in a land that had been his enemy, eating pie made by the mother of his friend Franz, finally understood what that word meant. Home was not geography, it was belonging. It was being seen. It was safety and abundance, and the freedom to become who you were meant to be. He was home. The years rolled forward. 1948 brought new challenges and growth. Franz enrolled in night classes at the university in Austin, engineering courses. His English was strong now, good enough to follow lectures, good enough to pass exams, good enough to dream in. He also formally courted Yuki, took her to movies, to diners, to walks along the river. Her family had been released from the internment camps, moved to California, trying to rebuild. She sent them money same as Franz sent money to Bavaria, two children of war, supporting families across oceans, building futures in America. In June 1948, Franz proposed. Nothing fancy, just the two of them on the ranch watching sunset paint the sky. A simple ring he had saved for months to buy. "I have nothing to offer you," he said honestly. "No money, no status, just work and hope, and the promise that I will spend every day trying to be worthy of you." Yuki smiled, tears in her eyes. "You offer me understanding, partnership, a future neither of us thought possible. That is more than enough." They married in August. Small ceremony at the ranch. David was best man. Margaret cried happy tears. Thomas gave a gruff toast about the strength of love that could bloom in the ashes of war. Mrs. Johnson, invited as honored guest, catered the reception with fried chicken that made everyone groan with pleasure. It was perfect. Small and simple and real. By 1949, Franz had saved enough for a down payment on a small house in Austin. 2 bedrooms, tiny yard, but theirs, a place they could build together. He also started his own small engineering firm, just him at first, taking contract work and designing irrigation systems for farms, consulting on construction projects. Word spread that the German engineer was reliable, fair, excellent at problem solving. Business grew. By 1950, he had hired 2 employees, rented a small office, started to think of himself not as a former prisoner, but as an American businessman. But he was not fully American yet, not legally. In March 1950, Franz received notification. He was eligible to apply for citizenship. 5 years of permanent residence, good moral character, employment, no criminal record. He qualified. The process took months. More paperwork, more interviews, a civics test to prove he understood American government and values. Franz studied like his life depended on it. Because in a way it did. This was not just about papers. It was about claiming his place, about saying yes to the country that had given him a second chance. The citizenship ceremony was scheduled for October 15th, 1950, Austin Federal Courthouse. Franz put on his best suit, the one he had bought for his wedding. Yuki stood beside him. David and his parents came. Even Mrs. Johnson took the day off to attend. 30 people were taking the oath that day, Mexicans and Germans and Poles and Chinese, all seeking the same thing, to become American, to belong. Judge Harrison was 70, dignified. He looked over the assembled immigrants with something that might have been pride. You come from many lands, he said, many backgrounds, many struggles. But today you become one thing, American. This is not just a legal status. It is a commitment to the values of freedom and equality and opportunity. To the idea that where you came from matters less than where you are going. Welcome home. Franz felt tears prick his eyes. Welcome home. Yes, that was exactly right. The judge asked them to stand. Raise their right hands. Franz did so, his hands steady, his heart pounding. I hereby declare on oath that I absolutely and entirely renounce and abjure all allegiance and fidelity to any foreign prince, potentate, state, or sovereignty of whom or which I have heretofore been a subject or citizen. Franz spoke the words clearly, felt them resonate in his chest, renounce. He was renouncing Germany, the land of his birth, his father's farm, his mother's kitchen, the language of his childhood. All of it, but he was not betraying them. He was choosing life, choosing forward, choosing to become something new from the ashes of something destroyed. I take this obligation freely without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion. So help me God. So help me God, Franz repeated. The judge smiled. Congratulations. You are now citizens of the United States of America. The room erupted in applause. Franz stood frozen. American citizen. It was done, legal, real. He was no longer Friedrich Weber, former captain of the Wehrmacht. He was Frank Mitchell Weber, American citizen. He had taken David's surname with permission, a way of honoring the man who had saved him in ways that went beyond physical rescue. Yuki hugged him. David shook his hand. Margaret kissed his cheek. Mrs. Johnson handed him a handkerchief for his tears. Outside the courthouse, David had arranged a surprise. A small party at a local restaurant. 20 people, friends from the ranch, neighbors, business associates, all gathered to celebrate. Franz stood and gave a short speech, voice shaking with emotion. When I came to Texas 7 years ago, I was an enemy. I expected hate. I received kindness. I expected prison. I received education. I expected to be forgotten. Instead, I found family. I found freedom. I found home. Thank you. Thank you for seeing the man, not the uniform. Thank you for giving me the chance to become my best self. I am proud to be American. And I will spend the rest of my life trying to deserve that honor. David stood and raised his beer. To Franz, he came here as a German, he became a Texan, and that is the best kind of American there is. Everyone cheered. Franz sat down, overwhelmed, grateful beyond words. 2 years later, in 1952, Franz's life had settled into comfortable routine. His engineering firm was thriving. He and Yuki had a daughter, little Emma, named after David's sister. They had bought a larger house, brought Yuki's parents to live with them. Life was good, stable, rich in ways that had nothing to do with money. Then one Saturday morning, there was a knock at the door. Franz answered, froze. Standing on his porch, looking older and gaunt and haunted, was Klaus Richter. For a long moment, neither man spoke. The last time they had seen each other, Klaus had been beating Franz in the dust of Camp Swift. 6 years ago, a lifetime ago. Hello, Weber. Klaus's voice was rough, uncertain. Klaus, Franz could barely form the name. May I come in? I need to talk. Every instinct screamed to refuse, to slam the door, to protect himself and his family from this ghost of the past. But something in Klaus's face stopped him. A brokenness that Franz recognized. The look of a man who had lost everything and was clinging to a final thread of hope. Come in. They sat in Franz's living room. Yuki brought coffee and then tactfully disappeared. Klaus held the cup but did not drink, just stared into it like it contained answers. I arrived in America last month, Klaus said finally. Refugee program. Took years to get approved. I had nowhere else to go. Germany. Germany is... Klaus's voice broke. Everything is gone. My family, my home, my brother died on the Eastern Front. My parents in the bombing of Dresden. I worked in the rubble for 4 years, clearing destroyed buildings, living in a refugee camp. The Soviets were brutal. Then the Americans came to our sector, and it was better, but still, there was nothing. No future, no hope. So I applied to emigrate. Franz watched him, tried to find the arrogant SS officer who had beaten him for choosing cooperation. Saw only a broken man. Why are you here, Klaus? Why come to me? Klaus looked up, met Franz's eyes, to apologize. I was wrong about everything. The war, Hitler, you. When you gave that speech at the camp, I hated you, called you traitor, beat you for speaking truth. But you were right, about all of it. Germany did destroy itself. We followed madmen, and it cost everything. His hand shook. Coffee sloshed in the cup. It took me years to see it, years of suffering, living in rubble, digging out bodies, watching people starve. The Americans who occupied our zone were kind, just like at the camp. They fed us, rebuilt schools, gave medical care, did not execute us for being soldiers. And I remembered the bacon, remembered your words, remembered that I had been the fool. Tears ran down Klaus's face. Can you forgive me? I have no right to ask, but I need to. I need to know that someone I wronged can find it in themselves too. Franz set down his own coffee, looked at this man who had once been his tormentor, saw himself 7 years ago, rigid with ideology, certain of righteousness, unable to see truth until it crushed him. We are in America, Franz said quietly, wind of second chances. If they gave me one, I can give you one. Klaus broke down, sobbed like a child. Franz sat awkwardly, unsure what to do. Finally, he reached out, put a hand on Klaus's shoulder. Let him cry. When the storm passed, they talked, really talked, for hours, about Germany, about the war, about the slow, painful process of unlearning lies and rebuilding identity, about forgiveness and change, and the possibility of becoming better than you were. By evening, Franz had helped Klaus find temporary housing, connected him with David, who found him day labor on the ranch, given him a chance to start over. Klaus would eventually become a citizen too, would work his way up from ranch hand to foreman, would marry a widow from San Antonio, would spend his remaining years trying to atone for the ideology he had embraced, would never fully forgive himself, but would learn to live with his past. And Franz would look at Klaus's transformation and understand something profound, that people could change, that even the most rigid could soften, that forgiveness was not weakness, but the ultimate expression of strength. Years rolled forward, 1960, 1970, 1980. Franz's engineering firm grew successful. He and Yuki raised 3 children, brought his mother to America before she died, watched his sister Anna marry an American soldier and build her own life in California, became a grandfather 7 times over. David remained his closest friend until David's death in 1994. Franz gave the eulogy, spoke of a man who had shown him that kindness was strength, that mercy was power, that America's greatest weapon was not military might, but the simple act of treating enemies like human beings. In October 1985, Camp Swift opened a historical marker, commemorating the POW camp, inviting former prisoners to return for dedication ceremony. Franz was 81 years old, still sharp, still active, still grateful. He stood before the small crowd, former prisoners who had stayed in America, former guards who remembered, historians documenting this footnote of war, media covering the human interest story. In 1943, I arrived at this camp as an enemy of America, Franz began. His voice was strong despite his age. I was 32 years old, broken, defeated, filled with propaganda about American brutality. I expected torture. I got bacon. Laughter rippled through the crowd. Even after 40 years, the bacon story had power. I expected slavery. I got baseball. I expected cruelty. I got friendship. One man changed my life. Sergeant David Mitchell. He showed me that strength is not about domination. It is about dignity. That America's power comes not from weapons, but from values. From the simple belief that every person deserves respect. That enemies are just people waiting to be understood. He paused, looked at the historical marker, at the land where his transformation had begun. 42 years ago, this camp did not imprison me. It freed me from lies, freed me to become who I was meant to be. I came as a German. I became an American. And I have never looked back, because America gave me what Germany never could, a second chance. And I have spent my life trying to deserve that gift. The crowd applauded, Franz stepped down, found Klaus in the audience. They embraced. Two old men who had been enemies, then friends, then brothers in all but blood. That evening, journalists interviewed Franz for their stories, asked about his secret to successful integration, how a former enemy became such a proud American. Franz thought carefully before answering. America did not win me over with force, he said. It won me over with breakfast, with baseball, with the simple act of treating me like a human being instead of a monster. That is a lesson the world still needs. That enemies are made by fear and lies. That friends are made by the truth and by bacon. He smiled. I am 81 years old. I have lived in America longer than I lived in Germany. My children are American. My grandchildren speak only English. But I have never forgotten where I came from, and I have never taken for granted where I ended up. I was given a gift, the gift of transformation, of second chance, of belonging. That is what America means to me, not a place, but a promise, that who you were does not have to define who you become. The journalist asked one final question. What would you say to people today who fear immigrants, who see enemies instead of potential Americans? Franz was quiet for a moment. Then he spoke, and his words carried the weight of lived experience. I would say remember that every immigrant is someone's son, someone's father, someone with dreams and fears and the capacity for change. Give them bacon, give them baseball, give them dignity, and watch what happens. You might be surprised. You might find that the enemy you feared becomes the brother you needed. That is what America did for me. That is what America can do for anyone willing to embrace its values, not just immigrants, but everyone. That is the true power of this nation, not military might, but the transformative force of kindness, of second chances, of freedom. He looked directly at the camera, spoke to a future he would not live to see but hoped would remember. To anyone watching from any background, I say this America worked on me, a German officer who fought against this country. If it can work on me, it can work on anyone, but only if we remember what made it work. Not force, not walls, not fear, but openness, generosity, the willingness to see humanity in everyone, even enemies, especially enemies. That is how you win hearts. That is how you build a nation worth living in. That is America at its best. Franz Weber died peacefully in his sleep in March 1998. He was 93 years old, surrounded by family, American family. His funeral was attended by hundreds, former prisoners and their descendants, ranch hands from the Mitchell spread, business partners, city council members, a representative from the German consulate. His obituary called him a pillar of the Austin community, a successful engineer, a devoted husband and father, a man who embodied the American dream. But those who knew him best remembered something simpler. He was the enemy who became a brother, the German who learned that bacon and freedom taste the same, the prisoner who found that the real cage had been ideology and America had given him the key. On his gravestone at his request were carved just a few words: Friedrich Frank Weber, 1911, then 1998, German by birth, Texan by choice, American by grace. He came, he saw, he belonged. And beneath that one final line that captured everything kindness won.